We're following up on changes to state contracts with support services for child care service providers and families. The move is generating a great deal of concern and questions. And here today to talk about the issues and the challenges surrounding this is Montana Free Press reporter Alex Sacrison. Alex, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Laurel.
All right, let's dive right into this. You wrote an in-depth article on this. You've been following this for a long time. So first explain what's happening and what's still developing with this.
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially what's happened is that earlier this year, the Department of Public Health and Human Services here in the state of Montana um, changed the model for how support services for childcare providers and families are allocated or covered. Formerly, this was covered by 6 nonprofits in different regions around the state. They would do everything from providing coaching and trainings for childcare providers to helping them with sort of the business owner know-how, as well as helping families navigate the state Best Beginnings Scholarship, which is designed to help families pay for childcare. And what the state did earlier this year was instead of contract out to those specific nonprofits, they changed the model and carved each of those services out into its own distinct contract, one for providers, one for families, and one for the business services for childcare providers as business owners, and awarded those, to different entities. So the provider services, which is the support for childcare providers, was awarded to, or there was an intent to award to a New York-based company called Shine Early Learning. And then the family services side was offered to 3 of the existing nonprofits in the state. The business services contract went to a nonprofit that's statewide called 0 to 5. And this is creating a lot of confusion, a lot of questions, because for starters, it's, as one advocate put it to me, a seismic shift in how these services are delivered throughout the state. But it's also raised a whole lot of questions about how are provider services going to be delivered at a statewide level by an out-of-state, company, and how are the nonprofits going to make this all pencil out for the 2 that are continuing on with the family services so far? So there have been a lot of questions about what this will do for nonprofit jobs. And this is still very much an ongoing negotiation between the entities who have been offered these contracts and the state health agency. So there's still a lot unfolding, a lot of questions unanswered, a lot of unknowns. What we do know is that there's been kind of an expansion of the transition period through into December to kind of accommodate some of these questions that have come up, these concerns. So, yeah, that's kind of where we're
And
at now.
you talked to the state about this and this decision. What did they tell you? What's behind this?
Yeah, the state hasn't specifically, at least in my communication with them, described in detail why they decided to change this model specifically to, sort of a statewide approach for childcare provider services. But what they did say was that this is part of a continued commitment to increasing access and affordability to childcare for Montana families. They also did note that they've built into these contracts some new performance requirements for the entities who are going to be delivering these services. And at least on the provider side, that includes retention of existing childcare contractors in the state, or childcare providers in the state, as well as an expansion of the available slots for families looking for childcare. So those are kind of built into that contract as performance metrics for the new provider, for the new sort of contractor, the new service provider. So,
All right. What did you find out about what this will do for jobs, for job loss, for creation of more jobs?
yeah. So of the 6 nonprofits that were previously delivering all these services or administering all these services, 2 have been offered the contract for family services, which means that the other 4 are looking at a situation where the provider services and the family services, they're no longer going to be administering that, which is going to mean lost jobs at those nonprofits. I spoke with the director at Child Care Connections in Bozeman about this a couple of weeks ago, and she'd mentioned that she's going to be holding on to the nonprofit registration, but it's likely that without the provider services and the state funding that supported those, she's going to have to scale down to a one-person operation by the end of the year, which means upwards of 15 people in that nonprofit no longer having jobs. Similar situation at Butte Four Seas, which has been servicing 6 counties in southwest Montana. Uh, the losing both these contracts because they had applied for both the family services and provider services. Losing both of those equated to about a $600,000 loss in funding from the state. And that's going to mean, uh, at least 8 people no longer being needed to provide those services at that local level. So, yeah, it's going to result in by my count, just roughly, 3 dozen jobs around the state that will be lost. It also will mean some hiring needs at that the nonprofits that are going to continue providing these family services. They're going to need to beef up that staff to meet the additional caseloads as they're taking on the work that these other nonprofits had been doing for years. So.
All right. Well, break down the implications for services. A lot of concern from parents and what's next for their children.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the big things that the directors of the nonprofits I talked to and the advocates in childcare that I talked to wanted to get across was this does not mean that services are going to go away. There's been a lot of fear, a lot of questions, a lot of concern among parents and among providers that these services will go away overnight. That's not the case. What it will mean is that how those services are delivered may look significantly different. We don't quite know yet. We don't know for the provider services, all of the training for new child care providers, the coaching for providers who are dealing with very, real live on the ground issues that they may need some outside assistance with. We don't know how those are going to look when Shine Early Learning starts administering those services at a statewide level. So on the family services side, some of what I've heard is that, there are going to be, needs for, it's going to impact how families can kind of drop into some of these offices. If, one of these two nonprofits is now covering half the state, they may not have the same sort of physical infrastructure that can accommodate families, who, may be English language learners. They may be, coming in from, other countries and needing to help navigating these state applications. And they may not be able to drop into a physical location to get that one-on-one, face-to-face, in-person assistance that they've been able to get so far. So those are the kinds of changes that we're really going to be seeing for these families and for these providers.
A lot going on with this. What do you anticipate next with this developing situation?
Well, as I said, the state health department and the nonprofits and Shine Early Learning are still all very much talking about how this is going to unfold, what these new regions for family services will look like with only 2 providing them. There are about 3,750 families in the state of Montana on the Best Beginnings Scholarship. And that caseload is going to get split between 2 nonprofits. So how those regions break out and how those caseloads are going to look for each of those potential new contractors is still unfolding. We also have lawmakers who are raising some very serious questions and concerns about this. Even today, during the legislature's Health and Human Services Budget Committee hearing, I heard a couple lawmakers who were raising questions about why did this model shift? What was the thinking here? And, also raising some questions about changes in funding. if you look at the funding that was allocated previously for these six nonprofits versus what was put out in the contract for family services, there's about a roughly $1 million reduction in state funding. And there were some lawmakers asking, where's that money going? Why was that reduction made? So there are a lot of
Interesting.
questions that lawmakers are weighing in on now actively ahead of the next session. So
All right. Well, we'll continue to follow this developing situation and follow your stories as well in the Montana Free Press. Thank you so much, Alex.
thank you, Laurel.